Alice Springs is a town right in the middle of Australia. It's got about 25 to 30,000 people. It's not that far from Ayers Rock, which you'll see depicted here on the right-hand side. It serves a wide area of inland Australia, an area where a great many people speak their own native indigenous languages, completely unrelated to English. In recent times, there's been a lot of concern about increased crime around the town. Some of the crime has been thieving, others been vandalism. Mostly it's been property crime, and there's been all sorts of discussion about it. One person has said, we need to spend more time with young people, we build more jails, but we don't build more schools. Shame on us. That was as recently as just last Monday, April the 10th. Some of the problems are indeed caused by Aboriginal young people. They're not the only ones, but they are among the troublemakers. They identify with American hip-hop music, and they also enjoy playing football. So here's a picture of some of them. Their faces have been blurred to protect the innocent. Their own statement of the problem was expressed once recently to a woman who was a secretary of a social working organisation. This young man said to her, look, we're in the middle of this, these two cultures. We can't speak our own language, our parents' language, and we can't speak English. So therefore we rebel. Now, in the past, the people like them would have spoken Aboriginal English and also basic normal English. But now it seems that things have changed, and they feel trapped like an alien in a cage, unable to really communicate with either side, either group. There's a huge amount of social distance and a sense of not really belonging. Now, this problem has been in the past labelled semi-lingualism. And it was a major issue back in the 1970s and the early 80s. And there was a lot of discussion about it in America amongst Latino people, and people concerned about the Latino situation in the United States. But just recently, the word semi-lingualism has become questioned. One of the questioners is this man, Nelson Flores. As recently as last year, he said, look, it's not necessarily a problem, it's just a difference. It's certainly not just limited to the United States and Australia. It's really a global phenomenon. Rampton wrote about it in the cities of England, and I'm sure it occurs elsewhere as well. These young men who don't seem to identify with either culture or either ethnicity. So they're cool and aloof towards both languages. Their attitude is not one of joy, but one of diffidence, apathy. The seeds of that antipathy are sometimes sown in the experiences they have of schools. They sometimes come from bush schools, remote areas outside of Alice Springs, and there is very little teaching in their own indigenous language. There are different gradations of bilingual education, and generally speaking, the Northern Territory government is on the lower end of the gradient of standards of bilingual education or amounts of bilingual education. Weak bilingual education is where there's a small amount of language taught only. Overall, these young people are in a majority, they are trying to fit into a majority setting. They're learning English, where English is the majority language. It's the language of the courts, it's the language of the police, the language of government. And so there's an identity issue for them. Now, very helpful in looking at this whole problem is Norton's social identity theory. And Norton started writing her stuff in the late 90s and in the early 20th century. And she talked about the need, these people have a sense of, what can I do? is linked with who am I. And they can't do much if they can't speak the language. However, are they just saying that to please the observers, to say what they've heard before? Or are they really, are they just putting on an act, or are they really being themselves? The reason is that there have been so many observers in the past that one wonders whether or not the Aboriginal people of Australia have learnt to know what to say to them. They are amongst the most often studied people on the face of the earth, and they scratch their heads and wonder why. So then, what is a direction that we should go in solving this issue? Well, one important aspect of it is to say that their dialect, even their lack of standard Australian English, is not necessarily a problem. It actually gives them opportunity to speak both their to learn their older language and also the newer English language. It's partly their attitude and the attitude of others that restricts them. And in a post-structural world, we know that attitudes can change. People are in flux and they can struggle. So then the way to help them is to analyse the problem and then resource teachers, train them, and also other carers, to be able to deal with this sort of situation. As a carer who's well trained will be able to act in the way that Kanagaraja describes, where he says they have to be radically other-centred, they have to be imaginative and alert to make on-the-spot decisions in relation to the forms and conventions employed by the other.